All right, I think we're ready. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Hillary O'Brien. I'm head of content here at Procurement IQ. And before I introduce our speakers, let's cover a few housekeeping topics. This webinar is being recorded. We will email the link to you along with the slide deck after the event so you can have it to rewatch or share with your colleagues. Look for that email, like I said, in a day or so. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them into the chat box and we'll do our best to answer those at the end of the webinar. And if we're not able to get to your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you via email. I've got the agenda on the screen here. We're just going to go through some quick introductions of our speakers. Then we'll get into some success strategies and procurement's role. And then, like I said, we'll hopefully have some time at the end for some Q&A. So your host for today's webinar will be Mara Michael, and she'll be speaking with lead analyst Sean Windle, and I'll be chiming in here and there as well. So Mara, I'll let you go ahead and get us started.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Mara Michael, and as Hillary mentioned, I'm here with Sean Windle. Today we're going to talk about challenges posed by e-commerce and digital disruption and some strategies to deal with those challenges. As we go through those strategies, we'll discuss where procurement fits in as well, and how it can actually help retail evolve to meet consumers' wants and needs. Sean, it's no secret that some retailers have really struggled. Digital disruption persists. Some time-honored brick-and-mortar stores have really had to reconsider how they do business. Toys R Us, for example, closed its stores earlier this year because, as some might say, they struggled to adapt. So set the scene for us here. The challenges faced by brick-and-mortar retailers really go beyond e-commerce, don't they? What else is disrupting and challenging them?
I think that's absolutely correct, Mara. E-commerce is really just the tip of the iceberg of what I think is a much more preeminent threat, which is digital disruption. Today, consumers are more informed and connected than ever before. We have smartphones, wireless internet, mobile apps, review websites. The availability and convenience of these tools, along with just increasing time constraints for households in general, has really fundamentally changed the way customers shop and execute purchasing decisions. So e-commerce is, it's part of these changes, but if physical stores are too focused on just battling e-commerce, companies like Amazon, for example, they'll miss the opportunity to enact the kinds of changes for their business that will help them evolve with the changing retail landscape. To this point, 90% of all retail purchases are still carried out in store. So online stores aren't necessarily the bad guy here, but what's different and changing rapidly is how those sales originate. According to Deloitte, 56% of physical store sales now begin online. So what does this mean? It means that instead of the physical front door being the front door, mobile phones and the internet are now the new front door to the retail store.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with that. I know that personally I follow and discover a lot of brands through social media. Instagram in particular, and I see brands really utilizing these tools in a new way to reach consumers on a new level. There seems to be a heightened level of engagement there.
Absolutely, and with that said, the real threat for physical stores isn't just from online retailers. It's from retailers in general, whether they're brick and mortar or online only. It's from those companies evolving through tools like Instagram to better compete. So the digital disruption, the changing consumer behavior, those are the threats that retailers are facing, more so than just e-commerce.
Yeah, that makes sense. While there are stores struggling, there's also plenty out there experimenting and doing it right. Like Best Buy, for example, they were on the brink of bankruptcy, but they were able to reevaluate their business model, and now they're really flourishing, while Toys R Us, they weren't able to make the cut. But let's shift gears a bit here. Hillary, where does procurement fit in with all this? How can these professionals help tackle these current challenges?
Sure. A lot of it goes back to the core value proposition that procurement brings to the table, no matter what industry they're in. With a lot of these challenges that Sean just reviewed, purchasing can provide huge value by supporting IT and other departments with buys related to all of these digital and e-commerce solutions that are really coming to fruition these days. A lot of these solutions are based on new and emerging technology, and that means that companies need to be very careful and selective about what they bring on board. We actually just did a webinar a couple weeks ago on why procurement needs a digital strategy, and that really fits in here perfectly as well. Procurement can ask the tough questions like, is our company ready for this technology? Is it going to fit in with our legacy and ERP systems? And perhaps even more importantly, is the technology ready for us? Are the bugs and kinks worked out? Is it mature enough for us to integrate into our company? And these are key questions that procurement can really identify and ask that perhaps the other departments aren't thinking about. The other element is, as we know, hitting profit targets is a huge challenge for retailers in today's environment, and saving money has always been a core function for procurement. And the challenging environment for retailers is making this function even more important right now. And we'll get into some more details about where procurement fits in as we start talking about these various strategies.
Thank you, Hillary. Those are all really great things to consider as we move forward. So Sean, back to you. What should retailers be doing to effectively compete and survive this transition period?
I think the first thing is experiment. And I know that's kind of a general term, but just to illustrate what I mean by that, I've sort of kind of broken this down into 3 general areas, but experimentation can take a multitude of different strategies. So the first way to experiment could be with the physical space of the store itself. Retailers like Best Buy now have sleekly designed themed kiosks for many of their products, specifically Apple, Samsung, Microsoft, and Amazon products. These products, instead of being sort of jammed on a store shelf, they're displayed in these design kiosks that really are more visually appealing. They promote better sales, and they just create an atmosphere where customers want to be in the store.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that as well. Again, it makes me think of social media and how a lot of retail stores and other places are trying to make their spaces more of an experience or more Instagrammable, if you will. For example, there's this clothing boutique by where I live, and I noticed that when you come in on Sundays, they're serving mimosas, which I think is really smart because creating an experience is going to inspire those consumers to kind of share and promote your brand for you.
Absolutely. And, I think the fundamental takeaway with that is, you have this big space. It can be used for purposes other than just selling products. It can create an atmosphere, like what you said. And even more so than that, I think stores should be looking at, sort of the second thing I would say under experimentation is that retailers should be looking to see what kind of services they can offer alongside their products, what services might complement the products on their shelves. For example, Ulta Beauty is a beauty retailer, and they sell different items like shampoos and conditioners and lotion. But these stores also offer salon services. Clothing retailers like Rebecca Minkoff, instead of just offering clothes, they offer sort of an experience where in the dressing room, you have smart mirrors and walls where you can shop for different items that might complement the shirt or pair of jeans you're trying on. Best Buy, in addition to all the different electronic products they offer, has invested heavily in their Geek Squad and smart home advisor services. So looking for services along with products is a really good way to utilize the space and give another reason for customers to go into your store. Thirdly, I would say retailers should always be looking to experiment with logistics. And by logistics, one great example is shipping times. So as retailers fulfill more and more online orders, it's important they look for ways to cut shipping times. And we've seen several retailers do this. One is DSW, the shoe store, which now uses their physical stores to fulfill more than 50% of their online orders. This number, the company expects to rise to 75 to 90% in the next 5 years. So instead of having their online orders fulfilled from a central warehouse that could be hundreds of miles away, they're now fulfilled from whatever the closest store that has that product is, and that's going to be a key competition factor if they're going to compete with the likes of Amazon and other big name online retailers.
Those are all excellent ideas, and clearly retailers are finding success with them, but how do you understand what is a passing fad and what's here to stay? How do you know it's worth investing in? For example, the buy online, pick up in store thing, that seems to be working, but now some places like Walmart and Amazon are installing lockers so you don't even have to step into a store. And what about cashierless checkouts? Those types of experiments and initiatives could cost tens of millions. How do you know it's worth it?
Yeah, I'll chime in here. My first thought would be to take a look at what the younger generations are doing, the millennials, the Gen Zers. You know, if they're starting to latch on to an experience or a way of shopping, there's a good chance it'll stick around since they do have significant, buying influence. Some trends like voice-activated shopping and the huge impact of YouTube and Instagram influencers have really been driven by younger consumers. Some other things retailers could do before they go all in is, consider pilot programs. I'm sure that's not, a new concept, but, testing things out in a certain market or a set of stores to see if an initiative latches on with your customers would always be a good idea for some of these new experiments. And then if your organization does decide to move forward with an initiative, here's again where procurement will be crucial in helping. Procurement can help find vendors who have done this for other retailers. So maybe they've already worked some of the kinks out with some of these experimental ideas. And it'll also be important for procurement to create airtight RFPs to draw out questions and mitigate risk before you decide to jump into something. And of course, asking the tough questions during negotiations with some of these experimental initiatives.
So clearly what we're talking about will require additional expenses and upfront investment, which is probably not what retailers want to hear.
No, I mean, right now spending more money when it's a tough environment is not the greatest thing they want to hear. But back to, procurement practitioners are experts at finding ways to save money. Retail procurement manages a ton of indirect spend, and this is a great place to focus to reduce costs, to free up some budget for these experimental investments. To back that up, a recent report by McKinsey stated that focusing on not for resale spend is the single largest incremental funding mechanism for business boosting ideas. And that's exactly what we're talking about here, is these business boosting ideas. So that's really an important area that procurement can focus on. And again, procurement's great at finding ways to maximize what you're getting. So if a company is going to take a risk on a new investment or experiment, here's where purchasing can be sure to get the best deals from those suppliers.
Speaking of experimenting, what about the store within a store concept that some retailers are trying? How does that fit into a successful retail strategy?
Good question. And it really kind of is sort of related to one of the first things we talked about, which is going back to the Best Buy example. These themed kiosks that they have with Samsung, Microsoft, Apple, and other companies aren't just a design element or an aesthetic element. They are that, but they're actually rooted in a partnership. So the kiosks are a partnership that's worked out between Best Buy and those vendors, and so it helps the vendor by better sales for their products, and it helps Best Buy by drawing people into their store and having them stay longer. So we're seeing Best Buy sort of partner with competitors like Amazon, which is one of the kiosks that they have in their stores now.
Best Buy and Amazon, aren't they rivals?
They are, and it's kind of ironic, but it's not surprising because we're sort of in a situation where if you can't beat them, join them. So the partnership with Amazon actually goes beyond just a themed Amazon kiosk inside the Best Buy store. Best Buy is the exclusive retail partner for selling Amazon Fire Edition TVs. So these TVs are not only sold in Best Buy stores, but they're sold on Amazon's website. And I think what this illustrates is that there is still a need. Amazon sees value in having access to a physical store, and Best Buy obviously sees value in having access to Amazon's online footprint.
So what factors determine whether a partnership will be successful or not?
It's a cliche word, but synergy is really important. In the case of Best Buy, like I said, Amazon is utilizing Best Buy's 1,000 store footprint. TVs are one of those items where customers want to see them in person. They want to assess picture quality in real life. And Best Buy is sort of, capitalizing on that and leveraging their ability to provide that. In contrast, or similarly, Best Buy is really utilizing Amazon's large online presence. When people shop online, they're more likely to go to Amazon rather than Best Buy. So the fact that Best Buy can now sell their TVs on Amazon's website is a big plus for them. So it's really a logical match for both companies.
Okay, so let me circle us back to our audience here. Hillary, can you expand on how procurement fits into this partnership idea?
Sure. Procurement can really fit in here by offering its expertise in negotiating contracts and understanding contract T's and C's. Obviously, with especially with competitors here, but any partnership, you want to protect your company from a bad deal. So procurement can really offer their expertise here in studying all the details and the nitty-gritties of the contracts. On the flip side, procurement, as we discussed, is great at maximizing a good deal. So if one of the partners is smaller or the quote-unquote lesser partner, that partner wants to make sure they're going to get as much as possible from the alliance. Procurement professionals are experts really at building internal and external relationships and really understanding the underlying needs of stakeholders and consumers in this situation. So that extends to partnerships as well.
Thank you, Hillary. I think it's pretty clear that procurement has an important role to play in this evolution and experimentation going on in retail right now. But let's bring it back to retail strategy. Sean, I've been hearing a lot about omni-channel. Can you talk about that, maybe help explain the difference between multi-channel and omni-channel?
Sure, and I think it's great. I'm glad that you mentioned or made a distinction between multi-channel and omni-channel, because these words, are used interchangeably sometimes, but they don't necessarily mean the same thing. And what multi-channel really just refers to the different ways that customers can purchase goods or services. So this can include brick and mortar stores, it can include websites, mobile apps, but the key with multi-channel is that these different channels don't necessarily interact seamlessly with each other. Omni-channel, on the other hand, is the practice of fully integrating these different channels so that customers have a unified experience across online and offline channels. So true omni-channel shopping really extends from brick and mortar locations to mobile browsing, e-commerce marketplaces, on-site storefronts, social media, and everything in between. So the goal being that because so many sales start online now, or begin online, but end in the brick and mortar store, omni-channel is really important, or utilizing omni-channel is very important to guide that customer ultimately through the online channels into the store and ultimately to a purchase. So a lot of things go into this, but just to summarize it, the mobile experience and the online experience have to be seamless, and there can't be any roadblocks that get in the way of guiding that customer into the store. And enhanced data analytics play into it, and IT infrastructure all play into it. But it's essentially the practice of making sure all those different channels interact with each other in a seamless way so that the customer is guided into the store.
I'm sure procurement plays a role here too. Hillary, can you expand on where they fit in?
Sure. So going back to in the very beginning when we were kind of talking about how procurement is going to be engaging in a lot of buys these days that support the push to become an omni-channel retailer, a lot of this digital and e-commerce. Just some of the ones I can think of off the top of my head that procurement might be involved with would be app and web developers, customization software so that people can customize items online that they could purchase that are specifically for them. You're probably going to be looking at marketing and user experience services to streamline the buyer experience that Sean was just talking about with omnichannel. The other thing with digital and mobile and all of this is it's producing a ton of data, and we all know how important data protection is these days. So a lot of these retailers looking to get into some of this stuff may need to consider data protection and privacy services. So these may be all, new buys that a company may have to get into, and procurement's going to really be there to support all these departments. This kind of takes us back to what I was saying with asking those questions about whether the company is ready for the technology, whether the technology is ready for the company. And again, of course, back to that core function of cost savings and cost avoidance, because these retailers really are going to need to cut costs in some other areas to make room for these new investments in digital and omni-channel.
Wow, this is a lot to take in. Sean, how would you sum up what we've talked about today? What are the takeaways for retailers and especially for procurement professionals at these retailers?
It's a great question, and it is a lot to take in. The thing I would really stress is that retail isn't dying, it's evolving. And along with the retail sector evolving, the procurement role is going to have to evolve right along with it. So we've sort of illustrated here, especially with the fact that Amazon pursued a partnership with Best Buy, that there's always going to be a need for physical stores. So e-commerce isn't the bad guy here. What's the challenge is just effectively blending the physical and online retail experience, because customers are changing the way that they interact with retailers and the way changing the way they purchase goods and services. So it's important that retailers recognize this and take effective steps to change their business operations to meet those challenges. So with all the new tech that's available for consumers, it's also available for companies. So go to where your customers are, go there and meet them and interact. And boiled down, I think all of these strategies are just about enhancing the customer experience. So procurement should have their fingers on the pulse of the stakeholders, and they're really incredibly well positioned to find the best suppliers to fulfill those needs and to minimize costs, and to get the best contracts and partnerships to make this evolution as seamless and successful as possible. None of this is going to be easy, obviously, and it's a long-term gain, but I think it's important to start now rather than later. And that way, over the course of the changing retail landscape, these strategies can start to yield results.
Awesome. Thank you for your insight, Sean, and thanks for helping to guide the conversation, Mara. We covered a lot in these past 20 minutes or so. It really is an interesting topic. I think we could have talked forever on this. There's so many interesting strategies and ideas out there for retailers these days. This was a lot to cover, so as a reminder, we did record this webinar. We'll be sending out the link to the recording along with the slides in the next day or so. We do have a few minutes here to get to some audience questions. If we're unable to get to a question, or if you think about anything afterwards, please feel free to follow up with us via email, and we'll see what we can get answered for you. Okay, so Sean, our first question. You mentioned Best Buy a lot as a great success story, but they've closed a lot of stores. I'm not really sure how that's showing success.
Good question, and I think what it ultimately shows is that Best Buy recognized, or they looked critically at what was working and what didn't work, and they had the discipline to sort of get rid of what wasn't working and pave a new path and stick with it. So I can't speak specifically to the stores that were closed, but my guess would be that these were underperforming stores in terms of sales, and ultimately their strategy and research concluded that it would be better to reallocate resources in different areas. So I think it isn't necessarily a sign of failure. I think it just is a sign that they looked at what was working and what wasn't working, and they made a business decision based on that. But I think I would stress that Best Buy was on the brink of bankruptcy a few years ago, and they really turned their entire company around the last couple of years. So I think that's important to take into consideration as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I think that, a lot of the stuff we talked about, it's a calculated risk. And as we talked about with, procurement really helping to be able to mitigate risks and save some costs so that retailers can take some of these calculated risks and reallocate some of their budget to trying some of these new things. Everything in business is a risk these days. So we have another question. Someone's just wondering if there are any other categories where procurement will be able to make a difference in this evolution. I'll go ahead and answer this one. Off the top of my head, aside from what we've already talked about, procurement might be more involved in sourcing new types of workers if procurement's involved in hiring agencies. I can think of, more personal shoppers, since we talked about all this experiential marketing and having these smart dressing rooms. I can definitely think of retailers needing more people to perform stuff like that, like personal shopping. And, you know, with all of these online orders, you might need more picker packers, you know, warehouse workers. I think I just mentioned more, you know, I can think of more experiential marketers. So people who are kind of well-versed in creating these new experiences for customers and going to where consumers are and seeing what consumers are latching on to. So those are just a couple of areas in hiring I can think of. I think the other thing to keep in mind that we talked about a little is it's going to be essential that someone in the organization, and probably procurement, keeps tabs on legacy systems and ERP systems that may not be compatible with these new technologies that we're talking about. So there's going to be integration, there's going to be talks with IT, there's going to have to be understandings of how to integrate these new technologies into an existing, you know, enterprise system. One other area that maybe I could think of is spend aggregation. You've got a lot of stores, a lot of geography to cover, you know, nationwide, worldwide, overlapping supply bases, plus all of that data we talked about. So I think retail procurement is going to need to turn to even more advanced, sourcing technologies to really aggregate that spend towards the goals of maximizing your buying power, increasing those savings to fund those digital and omni-channel investments. Hope that answers your question there. I think we have time for one more. Let me see. Sean, can you maybe talk a little bit about, you know, we talked a lot about some of these successful companies, but then we also mentioned a couple that maybe failed, like Toys R Us or Blockbuster. Can you think about what they didn't do or why they didn't succeed in this new environment?
That's a good question. And, you know, there's obviously a lot of factors that I'm not privy to that played a role, but what I can say is, generally speaking, if you look at, take Toys R Us, for example, versus Best Buy, Toys R Us was sort of a one-trick pony, right? They sold toys, and toys are not necessarily something that needs to be looked at or touched in the store or played with. If a kid knows they want a My Little Pony doll, you can just search for it online and buy it. You know, contrast that with Best Buy, and people want to see the TVs, they want to make sure the picture quality is there, they want to test out sound quality of a speaker system. So Best Buy has that leverage to get people in their stores, and I think also Best Buy recognized that despite that advantage, they also needed to sort of double down and reinvest in services and the aesthetics of their store also, and that's what they've sort of been doing the last couple of years. So I think Toys R Us sort of fundamentally lacked that ability to draw people in and keep them in the store. You know, a company we didn't even mention actually is Blockbuster. They were sort of left behind by the times because they sort of didn't have their finger on the pulse of where people were going to get media content. They sort of were too late to that party, and again, people weren't going to stores anymore to rent videos. They were utilizing on-demand systems from their homes. So I think it's important for retailers to sort of look at success stories like Best Buy and to see what they did, but not just carbon copy, but see what kinds of takeaways they can apply to their own stores.
Great, thank you. I think we've reached the top of the hour, so we're out of time here. Don't want to keep anyone any longer. Thank you everyone for joining us. We will be sending out the recording of this webinar and the slides to everyone in the next day or so. Thanks for your time, and again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk further about this. Thank you, everyone.